Jonathan Masters out of Louisville, Kentucky. I'm going to be talking about Louisville Mayors. Okay, so to give some sort of continuity between the past and the modern era, we're going to talk about the first five mayors, some other mayors, and then we're going to talk about the last five mayors. So let's begin. Okay, so 1828 is when you have John Carpenter Buckland. John Carpenter Buckland is the first mayor of Louisville. He's a Unitarian, no political party. He wants to unite everybody. He doesn't want to declare a party. John Carpenter Buckland was to win with just barely over 300 votes. He had 650 votes total were cast, and he won the majority of them. And then the governor would pick the top two candidates. Out of the top two candidates that were elected, the governor would choose which one he wanted. And so John Carpenter Buckland was eventually chosen by the governor in 1828, whoever that would have been, and he would serve 5-year terms. When Louisville first began, they would only have 1-year terms. So they would elect every year. So could you, I mean, I don't know if you can imagine now, you know, people say there's too much politics now. People are running for president like 2 or 3 years beforehand. Lots of money that goes into politics. But John Carpenter Buckland was running in a time when you could only serve 1 year. That was a term. Your term was what you could do in 1 year. Probably the reason why there is no structure, there's no stability for Louisville for such a long time. When I look at the list of Louisville mayors, there's several of them that doesn't succeed themselves. You know, back to back, they do. Rutherford B. Hayes. They're non-consecutive. There's 7 mayors who had non-consecutive terms. But just going down, John Buckland, he had 5, terms. He was mayor for 5 years. But then you have John Joyce, who was elected for just 1 year. You had W.A. Koch. So the third fucking mayor here, that would be our Thomas Jefferson, right? The Thomas Jefferson of Louisville, Kentucky is W.A. Koch. The George Washington of Louisville, Kentucky is John Carpenter Buckland, a Rhode Islander who came to Louisville to become mayor. So you just go down the list. I mean, he was only in office for less than a year, 1836 to 36, 3 years, 2 years, 2 years, 3 years, 2 years, 1 year, 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 2 years, and then 5 years. Finally, Charles D. Jacob gets another 5-year term. So John Carpenter Buckland would be the last 5-term Louisville up until Charles D. Jacob, 1876. So for 50 years, you only have, he was elected for 5 terms, 5 years, but he was the last one to actually be able to establish any type of infrastructure or institutions while he was in office. A year, you can't really do much in a year's time. So that's initially what I kind of look over. I also see that the top 4 of the 5 first mayors have no political affiliation. Frederick A. Kay, he's a Whig, so that's the 4th, right? So let's see, Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Adams. So John Buckland would be George Washington of Louisville. John Joyce would be the John Adams of Louisville. W.A. Koch would be the Thomas Jefferson of Louisville. Frederick A. Kay would be the James Madison of Louisville, and then David L. Beatty would be the James Monroe of the nation state, the city that was chartered by the legislature of Kentucky. Now, Kentucky just became formed, and actually, Virginia had given Louisville a charter a long-ass time ago. So let's talk about the basics. Who we are as a people. Who are we talking about? Right? The American Revolution, War of 1812. Lots of Kentuckians died in those wars, but they were essentially white men's civil wars for Amerindian land, which we see, happening over and over again. Now I have this book here, Kentucky's Road to Statehood by Lowell H. Harrison. So you have basic background. 1774 was when Harrod's Fort come in, so it's the first white settlement. When the American Revolution happened, if you were a white man who was under 21 or didn't own land, you couldn't vote, so you weren't a citizen. Women couldn't vote. Black folks couldn't vote. Native Americans couldn't vote. So really, the American Revolution didn't give us democracy. It gave us the illusion of a democracy. So you know, in 1774 in Kentucky, you still have, you know, they're using democratic processes, but they're using it in order to, you know, give the illusion that they actually care about everybody. So, like, point out the Electoral College, that's aristocratic. James Madison says that the whole point of the Constitution is to protect the opulent from the majority. So you want to protect the rich. That's what James Madison, you know, that's what he's supposedly the father of the Constitution, and he says that that's what you're supposed to do. The democracy, electoral college, the reason why we have that is because the raw opinion of the masses is not good enough, and so therefore it's got to be refined by the elite, by the aristocrats, by the electoral college. In John Carpenter Buckland's day, the governor was the last person who actually got to choose who the mayor was. So if you go to who settled in Kentucky, what type of people that Kentucky is made up of, in 1790, the white people that we're talking about that were coming in, 1791 is when Kentucky becomes a state to the United States. So this is 30, 40 years before Louisville gets their first mayor. You also had George Rogers Clark, who had some deserters off of Corn Island that formed a city charter from Virginia. But Kentucky didn't give Louisville a city charter until 1828 when John Carpenter Buckland became the first mayor. So the people that Kentucky was made up of, 52% of Kentuckians were of English descent, a figure below the national average of 57%. Then you also had 25% Scots and Scots-Irish. The Irish were 9%, the Welsh were 7%, the Germans were 5%. So the white people that we have, we got Germans, we got Welsh, we got Irish, we got Scots-Irish, we got Scots, and we got English. So we got six different ethnicities forming the basis of white civilization in Kentucky, because that's essentially what we're talking about. The folks that established Louisville, the folks that established the Kentucky legislature, rich white landowning men, a lot of time, you know, plantation owners, Indian killers, not a great lot of people. In this book, actually 1778, we got that, so in this book is a timeline, 2 centuries of black Louisville. So in 1778, it says that George Rogers Clark was on Corn Island, finds Louisville. At least 2 African Americans were present on Corn Island, May 27, 1778. One of them was semi-legendary Cato. So Cato Watts was there at the founding. And then you also had Caesar. So Cato was at the founding of Louisville, and Caesar was there. Cato was an enslaved African-American, a highly regarded fiddler who, when settlers on Corn Island celebrated their first Christmas, bested a French violinist at the celebration. So 1778, George Rogers Clark finds Louisville. You know, he lands on Corn Island, gets the Virginia charter, Virginia legislature to give him a charter. And while they're celebrating Christmas, Cato Watts is like the best fucking violinist at the celebration. You also got a Frenchman there, so there's a French violinist, but Cato was just fucking rocking. He's a fiddler, so he knew how to violin. You know, he knew how to be a good violinist. The other black person that was at the founding of Louisville was Caesar, and he accompanied Clark as an artificer on Clark's campaign against Vincennes and Kaskaskia. Not what an artificer is, an artificer. But he was there. George Rogers Clark is known for conquering the towns of Vincennes and Kaskaskia. Kaskaskia today has a population of 14 people. So essentially George Rogers Clark finds Louisville but wipes out Kaskaskia. That's 1778, so that's before 1828 we're at now. Slavery was one of the biggest dominant cultural issues, political, economic issues that was going on in Kentucky, in young America. Eventually, Kentucky is situated right in the middle there. So Kentucky is the first state in the West. When the 13 colonies started going out west, they went through the Cumberland Gap and they went into Kentucky. And so, you know, we're important with the Western imperialism, the manifest destiny of Americans. And so when they come to um, Kentucky, Harrisford was the first settlement of the West. So we have, you know, Indian genociders coming in, and then you also got slaves. One of the Baptist preachers tried to make slavery illegal in the Constitution, and because he pushed for that, eventually the Constitution was written up to where there was no Baptist preachers were allowed to run for political office. So we're going to see corruption, backstabbing, backhandedness in Kentucky all the time. Kentucky politics is the damnedest. Okay? And 1853, Stephen Foster composes Poor Old Uncle Tom Goodnight based on Uncle Tom's Cabin. The song becomes My Old Kentucky Home. So, my old Kentucky home, the sun shines bright on my old Kentucky home. That's Stephen Foster. It used to be called Poor Old Uncle Tom Goodnight. So, Poor Old Uncle Tom Goodnight. This song, it sounds like a slave, an old Negro spiritual. It's, you know, it's sort of melancholy-ish, and it's supposedly he had got inspired at the Federal Hill Plantation near Bardstown. They call that Federal Hill Plantation My Old Kentucky Home. At Federal Hill Plantation, they have the Stephen Foster story. It is performed by actors regularly, but they're wrong. I mean, he actually never went to Federal Hill Plantation, but the idea of the song is that he's inspired by the idyllic nature of plantation life. Big houses, serene, looks beautiful, right? It looks peaceful for the white people if you pretend the slaves aren't, you know, being whipped every day. And then the song is Poor Old Uncle Tom. So poor old Uncle Tom. Poor old Samuel L. Jackson's character in Django, who was the shittiest guy there. He was meaner than Massa himself, you know. And poor old Uncle Tom Goodnight. So the whole song is just about goodnight, poor old loyal slaves, poor old house Negro slaves, poor loyalist slaves who did not give a shit about their own freedom or their people's freedom. They were going to kiss up to their master because master was nice to them, and so they liked that master was nice to them, so they sold themselves and their people out. So poor old Uncle Tom also shows an Uncle Tom culture, right? Uncle Tom to the King Cole, obedient to King Cole, obedient to the corporations, and it would take the 1891 Constitution to establish an anti-corporate political strand of thought in Kentucky. So the poor old Uncle Tom, it's old Negro spiritual, kind of like Amazing Grace, right? Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved the poor wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. I was once blind, but now I see. So that's an old. It's based on actually a guy, an old slave trader who saw what had happened and then just regretted every fucking thing that he had done. So, you know, I mean, this is early European colonization. We know about Robinson Crusoe, you know, Haiti, Christopher Columbus, wiping out the Taino Indian, Hernando de Soto. He was the first white man to come through Kentucky, killed Indians while he was here. So immediately, as soon as white man comes into Kentucky, they're just killing Indians. So that's Kentucky, that's Louisville, that's where we're at. That's where we're situated, 1828. So 1828, John Carpenter Buckland serves 5 terms. You know, before Louisville, you can only be elected to mayor for 1 term. And John Carpenter Buckland was able to be a mayor for 5 terms. So John Carpenter Buckland, he's a Rhode Islander, Unitarian, didn't have any political affiliation. He died in Louisville. He's buried in Cave Hill Cemetery. His father was a merchant and a sailor. He was a captain in the Navy during the Revolutionary War. So John Carpenter Buckland comes from the white revolutionaries, a family of a white revolutionary that fought in the Revolutionary War. John Carpenter Buckland himself served in the Rhode Island militia. He owned several ships, and he married Sarah Smith in 1803. So that's 1803. I guess the family moved, so yeah, he owned several ships. So John Carpenter Buckland is a rich man, and we'll see that too. Not only is it the aristocracy, but I mean they're rich people that's in the aristocracy, the oligarchy, the rule by the few. So in the aristocratic aristocracy, or the aristocratic oligarchy, you have John Carpenter Buckland who comes out and becomes the first mayor of Louisville, thusly setting the pace for all the future mayors in this city.